Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. I like seeing where you're all from. We are all coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts, and I will start sharing my screen. Today we will be talking about the process from creating your resume to looking at what kind of jobs you might be interested to going through what you should ask in interviews, how to deal with a technical interview question, and all the way into you got the new job and what the first few days might be like. So to introduce myself, I'm Durward. I've been at Viva for 5 years. I graduated before that in Boston, Massachusetts. I've worked at our Bay Area headquarters, as well as now our Boston location where I'm coming to you guys from. So that's a bit about me. I'll allow Kara to introduce herself and take it away.
Hi, I am Kara Shirley. I'm an associate software engineer. I've been at Viva for about 1.5 years, going on 2 years pretty soon. I also graduated from Northeastern in Boston, and I'm currently at the Boston office, so have stayed in Boston. And yeah, we're excited to bring you this presentation. So let's look at this resume first. As that title slide said, this is the first look into you. So it's super important that you make that good first impression. So we have some of the basics here, the classics, you want to make sure you have your contact info. Here I have LinkedIn and GitHub. Usually, you put your LinkedIn username, your GitHub handle. I will venture to say that in software engineering, GitHub is super important. And it's really important to have projects, even if it's like the smallest of projects that can be linked to show your skills and things you've worked on in the past. I know in a lot of school things, usually those are on GitHub. So definitely to have that in your resume is great as a first look. And then your education, what degree you're getting, when you graduate, stuff like that, the classic tech skills, work experience. And again, projects kind of describe those things that they might see in your GitHub. And then for relevant classes, we do like to say, this is the part and your work experience and projects that you can kind of cater to whatever job you're applying to. So, for example, if you're applying to a web dev job, it's better to put that, either UI experience or backend web dev experience classes rather than like data analytics classes as much. So, and then vice versa, if you're applying for a data science job, it's always good to have all of those analytics classes and databases and whatnot. So that is the part of your resume that you can really cater to whatever the position you are applying to. And then, as a new grad, definitely stick to one page. It's cleaner and it's just easier to see into you without having to flip a page over or scroll to the next page, I guess, if it's online now. And always include your interests. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But yeah, so this is the general outlook of what should be on your resume. So now we're going to go to the tips. So as I mentioned, this is the first look at you. You don't want someone to look at your resume and think, wow, this is like kind of chaotic and kind of a mess. So you want to keep that clean format, 1-inch margin, single spacing, 12-point professional font, usually, one of the basics fonts that are easy to read. And I always like to use like some spacing and titles and even lines to separate the sections, just so it's so easy to read and so easy to like narrow your focus on if you're in talent or recruiter to like be like, okay, what skills do they have, and be able to focus right on that section. And then I'm going to skip to reinforce your knowledge. So this kind of goes with the GitHub. So you want to connect your experience to your skills. So whatever you have in your project descriptions or your work experience descriptions, it's always good that it connects to that skills section. So if you have Java in your skills section, make sure to, in your project section, say what you use Java for and how you used it. And then if you have a language on a software engineer language, a tech on your resume, be ready that they might ask you a question in that language. So make sure that you're super comfortable with whatever's on your resume, because in a software engineer interview, you're going to probably get asked about that language, whether it's an actual coding question or whether it's just a general knowledge question about the language. Just be ready for that. So make sure that you're prepared if that is on your resume. And usually we like to say, put the language or softwares in the order that you're most comfortable with. So that, you can say, I'm strongest in Python, second strongest in Java, etc. And then finally, my most important thing on a resume, other than all of the real bones, but the most important thing to help you stick out is to represent you. So you do not want to skip your interests or activities. These are what makes you more than just, the work that you've done. It makes you a person. It gives you some insight into your personality. So yeah, interest, activities, they give you a glance into your person, which is super important on a resume, because a lot of the times as new grads, they aren't all that crazy different. So if you have that point of difference to help you stick out, it's super important. I can say from my own personal experience, I have a part of my interest that says alpaca lover or owner. I don't even remember what it says, but basically I have 2 alpacas, and I have had probably I did co-op at Northeastern. So I have a lot of interview experience, probably north of like 20 interviews I've done. And in every single one of those interviews, that question about my alpacas from my interest section has come up. And to this day, the talent person that recruited me at Viva has brought up that she remembers that she wanted to ask me about my alpacas in the interview. So it's like super important to just give you that point of difference, and show people who you are. Everyone knows I'm an animal lover at my job and before I was even hired. So that is like super important to me. Yeah, so let's move on. So now you have your resume, now you got to send it out to people. And so we'll go on to the job search. So places to look. Obviously, you're in the right spot. You're at a Way Up presentation right now. You saw Viva, our own listing on Way Up, but there's some other places to look. We really like university career portals. A lot of times talent and recruiters at companies are there's like one specific person that works on college and undergrad recruiting, and they tend to go to these career portals from different universities, university job fairs, and then networking. Always, if you have had past internships or co-ops, always make sure to reach out to people that you have worked with in the past that maybe have a new job or maybe have the same job, but they have a connection to someone that has a job that you're interested in. And always keep in touch with those people, and keep your network strong. And then LinkedIn, if there is someone on LinkedIn or even a past coworker, make sure to reach out on LinkedIn. It's gives you an in to the recruiters, and maybe ask for more information and get their email and stuff like that. I know it can be a little bit uncomfortable or unnatural for new grads sometimes, but it is important. And honestly, it never hurts to really just get your name in there. And even if they aren't accepting new grads right now, there's always a possibility that they, put you in a database or put you on a list. So you're on that list, and the next time that they are recruiting, you're the first person they reach out to. And then the last site, not so much for directly applying, but Glassdoor is a really good resource for reviews and company sizes and all of the details about a company. And then from there, if you find a company that you really like, you can apply directly on their website. And again, if you don't see a listing that is particularly attractive to you, or if you see one maybe at a higher level, you can always reach out to those recruiters on LinkedIn and see if they have anything else available. And then what to look for. So this is really time to focus on yourself and what you want. So it's always super important. You're going to be doing this every day for a long time, 40 hours a week or more or less, but usually 40 hours a week. So you want to do the work that excites you. You want to do some work that you're passionate about. And then, in the post-COVID world, you want to make sure you know where you stand on remote work policies. So here at Viva, we have a hybrid policy, so you can come in, you don't have to come in, you could be fully remote, you could be fully in the office. So I really like that about Viva, and it's one of the reasons I chose, and how that's what I decided for when I asked this question to myself about remote work policies. But there are some people that are fully remote, want to be fully remote. So you want to make sure that you are aware of what the company you're applying for and what their remote work policies are. Some companies, like I said, some are hybrid, some are fully remote, and some are, you have to be in the office 3 or more days a week, stuff like that. So you definitely want to focus in on that in this job market today. So, and then as for the actual listing, as for the job posting, you don't want to get tied down to job requirements. A lot of times, almost all the time, it never hurts to apply. It just gets your name in the door, and they're obviously going to look at your resume and decide if they want to give you an interview. So if there are 10 languages in a job posting and you only know 5 of them, or you only have experience with 5 of them, don't add the extra 5 to your resume. Make sure that you keep the 5 that you're actually comfortable in on that resume. And then if they give you the interview, make sure to mention, I'm willing to learn these other languages. I'm always willing to improve myself. And like I said, they're going to see a resume, and if they give you that interview, they know what you're capable of. Or maybe if they know your 5 strong languages, and that's a good thing for them. Or so make sure you don't let that tie you down. And then definitely don't let the technologies listed tie you down. So a lot of these technologies are industry technologies. So I put some examples: Kubernetes, Docker, and it's totally okay if an undergrad hasn't experienced these. It's obviously a plus if you have, but a lot of them are industry standards. So if you haven't had, that 6-month co-op or an internship, or even if you just worked at a company that didn't use that technology, don't let that deter you, because a lot of these things can be learned on the job. And then, similarly to what I said in the last slide, when you're researching the company, make sure you really figure out what you want. So do you want a small company, startup company, a medium-sized company, a large company with a small office, or just a large company in general? There's a lot of different renditions to that. So make sure you kind of look that up. Make sure that you know what you want going into the job search, and what kind of culture you want, what kind of benefits and culture that you want to be looking for. And then on the same lines, read between the buzzwords. A lot of these job postings want to attract you. So they use these, words: modern technology, cloud, lean, agile, and a lot of these things, again, are industry words and can be learned on the job. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at these job postings. Great. So you applied. You now have your interview. So what questions are we going to ask in the interview? That's always going to be a part of any interview. You want to ask questions. This interview is as much for you to figure out if this is the job you want, as much as it is for the company to figure out if you're the employee they want. So I like to say, ask yourself these questions first. Kind of reflect on your past experiences, whether it's, in school with projects, or at past internships, if you've had any. And so these are the kinds of things you want to look at. You want to look at the structure that you've liked in the past, and ask questions on that. Ask what the structure of the team is. If there's something specific that maybe you didn't like, make sure that team at that new company is not structured the same. Or if it is structured the same, bring up, have you ever had this issue that maybe you as the interviewee has had in the past? And then what management styles, what tech practices have you liked? So if you have had past internships, how did the process from getting the task created to actually getting into the developer's hands and get to, and what are you looking for there? Are you looking for more hands-on with the customer, like full discussion, or are you looking for more of a middleman with a project manager, or a product manager in between? And then what culture are you looking for every day? These are big things. It has a good amount to do with the company size as well. that being said, there are a lot of bigger companies that still have a good culture and whatnot. So it's important to look into this and really know what kind of culture that you want to be looking at. And then what do you want your future at this company to look like? For me personally, when I was looking for my first job, I was looking for somewhere that I could see myself long term. And so that guided my questions to, what does it mean for me in a couple years, or maybe even in a year, on team switching and internal transfers? And will this company really help me to grow and not just stay on one team for 15 years or something like that? So those are questions that are definitely to be asked after you ask, what future do you want at the company? So yeah, so now onto the actual true questions. Make sure you know the company. You want to know as much as you can about this company before before you get into this interview, right? So you want to research the company that you're interviewing for. You want to make sure you know the position that you're interviewing for. If you don't know the exact team or what they do, ask. This is a great question to ask. What will I be actually doing? What team will I actually be a part of? And then big thing, don't ask questions just to ask questions. If you're not truly interested in the answer, that you're just wasting both your time and the interviewer's time. So make sure you're asking questions because you're genuinely curious, and make sure you find questions that you're genuinely curious and knowing the answers to. I mentioned this last slide, but the interview is just as much for you as it is for the company. So as you're researching the company, take note of things you find interesting and take note of things you really want to know more about, because this is a really important part of the interview when you are, have multiple offers from different companies and you want to kind of figure out which one, and you like all of the work. You get into those questions that you asked and the answers to those questions, and that's how really it is to make a decision. So yeah, now I will pass it off to Durward to talk a little bit more about what happens after those questions and the other part of the technical interview part.
Thank you, Kara. Let me just move some things around so I can see the screen. So yes, you've gone through the first behavioral part of the interview. You've gotten your questions asked. Now comes kind of the daunting part of the coding questions that you are likely to be asked in many of your interviews. So let's base this kind of around a basic question that you might have seen before. Let's base everything off of this: determine if two strings are anagrams. And on first impression, that might just seem like a basic, easy question that you can just start coding right away, or what an anagram is, so you can go for it. But there are some tricks, and having gone through giving a lot of software development interviews myself with these coding challenges over the past couple of years, there are a couple things that I've appreciated that certain candidates will do. So I'll walk through some of those. So in general, I'm going to divide the process of solving these technical questions into 3 stages. The first being clarifying the question and understanding kind of the parameters of what we're solving. 2, getting working code, just solving it in general, because the last thing you kind of want to do is end with a without anything to show for, or without any working solution. And then the last step is kind of how to deal with optimization. I think that's a thing on most of our minds when we're trying to answer these questions is, well, how do I reach this most optimal solution that interviewers may be looking for? So I'll provide some tips on that. So for clarification, as I mentioned, you might understand what an anagram is, like net and tenor anagrams. Some candidates I've seen will just start coding right away and not ask any more questions than that. And that's kind of a concern off the bat. So I'd say whenever you get a question, really start trying to think about what you've assumed and challenge those. So I have some examples here, like what if there's capitalization involved? Are these anagrams in that case? If you have spaces or punctuation, what does that mean? Oftentimes, giving your own examples of what you expect can help guide what you're looking for and can help the interviewer kind of understand that you're approaching this from a more holistic sense, which is very valuable. Also more like edge cases, like, can we expect an empty string or a null value? What happens if you're given numbers? If you're in a non-strongly typed language like Python, yeah, what happens if it's like the number 343 versus a string 343 or 334 or whatever? Like, can that compute as an anagram? That's good questions for kind of the language you're working with. What's the output expected to be? Talk about edge cases, and do you want to handle that by throwing errors or trying to just like return different values? All these things are great questions to ask, and just beyond the ability to solve the base problem, it'll be very impressive to technical interviewer if you're showing that you're considering these, because that just shows that when you enter your job that you'll have this more holistic approach, and you'll be able to kind of like jump in and challenge some of these and do some kind of like mental debugging before you just jump into problems, which is always what we're looking for. So then going into solving the problem, with this and really every part of the interview, communication is very important. I would highly recommend, if you have an idea, to talk through it first with the interviewer before actually starting the coding of it. Because that way, if you're saying, hey, I want to do it this way with these ideas, they can challenge you. They can be like, okay, yes, that makes sense. Or they can be like, hey, no, this one part of what you want to do, let's consider something else before you go coding it. If you start coding without saying anything and you get stuck, it can be really hard as the technical interviewer to kind of step in, because you haven't kind of started this kind of conversational interaction. And with certain interviewers, they might be willing to give you assistance or guidance, but they'll only give you as much as you kind of communicate with them. So if we don't understand how you're trying to approach this problem, there's no way we can kind of like step in and give you advice or guidance. And again, I know we're all probably trying to focus on like, oh, well, what would be the most optimal solution for this? But if you can't think of it right off the bat, I wouldn't waste time trying to think about it. Instead, I would propose the solution that you're confident with, that you know will work first. Kind of clarify with the interviewer that, hey, I understand that there's probably a more correct solution, but I just want to get something working first. You can talk with them. They can tell you whether that's okay or not. And then you can move on from there. So in the spirit of that, let's look and see kind of how an anagram approach, and I'm using Java for this example, might look. So if we were given this definition for an is anagram method and asked to fill this in, I might have a candidate who would comment the specific steps that they plan on implementing first. And this is very nice. It shows that, hey, these are the sort of logical steps I'm doing. Does this sound good? And I can say like, oh, well, I don't know. We should just try to keep in strings, or I can just say, yep, create char arrays. Let's go for it. So that would be an example of kind of laying out the comments first. Then after you've gotten the okay, you can do some implementation here, show that it works, run through it. There may be some edge cases you're missing, or some optimizations, and that is for the next step of this. So once you have a working solution, or kind of as you're discussing the problem, the optimization time complexities are going to come up. So you should really be comfortable with understanding the big O notation of different things like sorting algorithms, which we used, inserts, or reading through data types, what nested loops do in terms of complexity. And stuff like space complexity might get asked as well. Not always, but sometimes. And kind of on that note, just if you aren't fully confident, that's okay. It's better just to be upfront and honest. So if you're asked something like a space complexity question and you're not sure, I would always recommend that you just say, hey, I have an idea and I can give this, but like I'm not 100% sure, but let me take a stab at it and give you my best guess. And that just helps open the conversation up a lot more than if you go in with a confident answer that's very wrong and just kind of make that statement, then that doesn't go as well usually. So other advices in terms of optimizations is just avoid nested loops. Oftentimes that is the easy brute force solution to many of the software development coding questions, but it's always a better way. And usually that's around more advanced data structures, which we'll show in our solution. And again, just communicate what you're thinking, listen for clues. If you are saying like, hey, I want to use this, an interviewer might say, well, maybe you should consider a different data type. And that's a good key about like, hey, well, okay, what other data structures are there? Maybe I should use a map or a dictionary or something like that. So oftentimes they will give you little tidbits. They're not going to solve the problem for you, but there are little clues that you can get, and you can only usually get those if you've kind of created this conversational approach with them. So this is our original implementation. So converting these to char arrays are going to be O of n each time. The sorting algorithm is n log n, and worst case of the comparison is O of n. So our algorithm that we've solved is anagram for is O of n log n, and we can do a little bit better. So as mentioned, we could take advantage of something like a map in Java to kind of achieve a better solution. So here's an example. Now, obviously, this has turned into a much bigger question or a much bigger implementation. So this can be kind of challenging maybe to write at first, or maybe not for the anagram question, but for some of your more challenging questions that you'll see. So I'll just walk through this quickly. We've added a short circuiting that we did not have before, where, hey, we can quickly check if the lengths aren't equal. We can just fail it out. We'll still convert to the array. We'll create a map to use because we can expect alphanumeric characters. That could be exclamation points, spaces, but we just want to see if all of them are equal for this case. So first we'll loop through another O of n operation and add in this is a fancy way of just, if the key value pair does not exist in here, we'll add in 1, otherwise we'll increment it. Then afterwards, we will go through again, and with the second string this time, and if the second string contains a character that we haven't seen from adding in the first string, we'll just return false. Again, another way of short circuiting. We know that this is no longer equal. Otherwise, we can compute and do value -1. And then afterwards, we'll just loop through the map itself, just the map values, and make sure everything is set to 0. And that's good to go. So this is a more optimal solution. Now, there are other ways to improve this, which a technical interviewer would be looking for and maybe challenging you to approach. So even with this example, there are imperfections or things that we can kind of tweak to make it a bit better. For example, we're not doing null case handling here, so there's an edge case that wasn't considered. Or yes, we're short circuiting on contains key, but we could also do another short circuiting where we could get the value back, and if it's down to -1, that means we've seen that character more times in the second string than we have in the first one. So we could just return false there immediately. So there's a few different things we can do, and of course there's different approaches that you can take to a problem like this. But all good things to consider. There's always like little tweaks you can make here and there, and I think just some more of them you try to capture, the more impressive it will kind of look. But again, first and foremost, get a working solution, because you want to be able to execute your code and show that it works in the first place before you optimize. So final tips. Take advantage of sites like LeetCode and other websites that give you these practice problems, or cracking the coding interview, all that stuff. These are really invaluable tools. They'll get you in the mindset to answer these questions, to look at them in a way that normal coursework or internships might not really push you to do. So it will just get you in that mindset of optimizing and understanding the algorithms. And it's okay if you don't really get the most optimal solutions at first. When I was first using LeetCode for my job search, I was not, but they often have good write-ups on the optimal solution. And if you read those and try to understand how those work, and then try to use that for future problems that you're solving, that will do a lot of help. So just practice, 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 really. And again, as mentioned earlier, study the data types that you're working with, understand how to use more complicated things like trees or maps or dictionaries, understand whether you're using a strongly typed or not strongly typed language like Python, and kind of what that means for your implementation approach and what edge cases you might need to consider. And then also brush up on the specific algorithms. You will probably be asked about depth first search, breadth first search, Dijkstra's algorithm. Those might come up as solutions for certain questions. So again, I think LeetCode and some of those sites will cover that, but it's also helpful just to kind of like look up the Wikipedia pages for some of these, just to get a brush up on just some common implementations for those. And again, don't be scared to ask questions. This whole thing is about communication. And as I've mentioned many times before, the more you talk with your interviewer about kind of your thought processes or what you don't know, the more that interviewer can step in and work with you on that. And ultimately, as a technical interview, that's kind of what I'm looking for. It's more about how comfortable I feel working with you and how I feel like you'd be a fit on a team than just purely raw coding skills. So that communication can be really key. So you've done all this prep, you've made it through the technical interview, you got an offer, and you're starting your first days at the job. So let's kind of go through what you might encounter. So I'm going to focus on three things: the imposter syndrome that you might feel, and I think several people, including myself, felt when they first started, the importance of flexibility, as well as just the power of networking and what that can do, both internally for your time at the company and on your team, and for your future opportunities. So imposter syndrome, we might have all felt either at previous internships or in school at some point. And I would say even just between school and work, there's a huge difference. With school, you're kind of in your classes given pieces at a time to focus on, and you're kind of expected to pick that material up very quickly. But in industry, you might be thrown into a very large code base that you don't really know, with languages that you haven't used before, technologies like Docker or Kubernetes that you don't know about, and it can feel very overwhelming. And especially for us at Viva, we're kind of a life sciences company. We both work on clinical trial software, and I did not take any biohealth classes before, so I was not familiar with any of the sort of industry specific acronyms or jargon or any of that. And so that can be very overwhelming, but it's okay. The company does not expect you to know all this stuff instantly, especially coming out of college. It's kind of understood that it's a growing process and you're kind of growing into the role. And so on that mindset, it's just very important to keep open-minded, ask a lot of questions with your mentor or your team so that they can help guide you the best they can. And I'm still learning things about our code base or about kind of the infrastructure and even just the industry knowledge of clinical trials 5 years in. So it's just an ever evolving process. And also utilize resources. So if there are things like Java docs or just code documentation or like internal wiki pages on some things, you can utilize those to kind of build up some knowledge and expertise. And also, if you find useful things that you're worried about forgetting, definitely keep your own separate note or whatever works for you, a little place where you can go back and refer to that information, so that you can easily get that and use it. I have many commands that I use both in the command line and elsewhere, like SQL statements, and I've just kind of stored those in a note so that I can easily refer to them if I need to use them again. So flexibility. When you start a new job, it might be in an area that you don't know a lot about. And also, even if you've started in one team or position, a company might ask and might have their needs change, and you might have to adapt to that. And for example, I came in with a lot of software or a lot of mobile app development experience, but now at Viva, I've been working on web apps based off of Java and React. I had some Java knowledge through Android and just some classwork, but not really a whole bunch of enterprise Java, and also did not know React. And that is overwhelming, but as long as you're kind of, again, approaching it with an open mind, these are great opportunities for you to learn new technologies, to build your own skills. This ultimately, at the end of the day, will make you a better programmer, a better candidate for hiring in the future, because you will know more things. And it's good to just keep open, be adaptable, so that you can really learn from these things that are thrown your way that you might not have anticipated. And on that note, opportunities will come along here and there. Either internally, you might, part of the whole thing with companies' needs changing, you might be asked to do something else or work on a new team, or maybe a recruiter from a different company might reach out to you on LinkedIn and present you with a new opportunity. And so it's just really valuable to keep an open mind when these come along, really kind of, to Kara's point, really think about what's best for you and understand kind of the pros and cons of that, and just figure out what you want for your career trajectory. And if there's an opportunity that works and it works kind of within your timeline and stuff, and you're kind of the space that you are in, you should go for it, because those opportunities shouldn't be taken for granted. They might not come again necessarily all the time. So, and finally, in terms of being adaptable and flexible, always keep in mind your own mental and physical health and the limits there. I know in our industry, and I'm sure many of you might have heard of different people's internship experiences or the reputation that some companies will get for people kind of working really long hours or working on weekends. And while that does maybe happen on occasion, you should not necessarily feel the need to do that if you are uncomfortable with it. Don't just go in expecting you need to do this to prove yourself. Certainly set good work-life balance, and that will really help prevent any burnout that might happen, because that happens too often in our industry. So just really, it's kind of up to you as the employee to just set those standards yourself. If you're the kind of person that this is kind of what you love and you want to do it, go for it, but just know that that's not expected of you. And it is, again, kind of on you to establish those boundaries. So finally, networking. You're on your new team. They are the people that you're going to spend really most of your days with for the next several years. So they are 40 hours a week. That's a lot of time. So I really would recommend that you get the time to really get to know them, really kind of build that camaraderie, both kind of inside the office and with some like water cooler chat, or outside of office hangouts too. So this picture is of me and Kara and our teammate Nikita, and we were at a recruiting event in Atlanta, and afterwards we went to the aquarium and kind of explored around the city, got dinner, like listened to live music. It was a lot of fun. And that might not seem necessarily super important, but that can really help build the communication, the teamwork within your team, and really just help boost morale. And it just makes you feel kind of more tight knit and more kind of trusting of each other. And this doesn't just apply for kind of like friendships too. These are also great connections, as Kara said, that you can rely on for future opportunities, both internally and externally. If you know people who work at different companies and you're interested there, you can reach out to them. They may reach out to you if they feel that you are a strong person at in that space. So all of these connections are just really win-win all around. And it helps you feel more comfortable. It can make you feel kind of like you belong more. It can help kind of reduce the intimidation level of either speaking to new people or just being in a company where you don't know a bunch of people. So just building those connections can be very healthy and rewarding. And so that is largely it in terms of our presentation. So I think we'll open it up for any questions that people may have. I have not looked at the Q&A yet. So Natalie, if there's anything that you want to mention.
Yes, I do have some good questions. The first one, I think I'll give to Kara. It was a little bit more related to what she was talking about. So Jordan asked, you mentioned that when you look for a job you want, or you should look for a job you want, but if you're a recent graduate or a current student, how picky can you really allow yourself to be? Good question.
That is a good question. So I think it really depends on what you want in your timeline. As a person looking for a job, I totally get that the current industry isn't so amazing right now. And the job searches can be a little bit difficult. So yeah. Okay, so this is what I did. So for the first couple months that I was looking for a job, I was only applying to ones that I would take. And that helped me with the fact that, that situation, if you got a job offer, but you didn't finish interviewing at another job, or if you still hadn't heard from a different job, I was only at first applying to companies that I really would say yes to, no matter what the situation was at a different company. Now I'm lucky I found Viva. They were one of those companies. So I got to say yes. But my next step, if that didn't work out, was to be a little less picky and to apply more broadly to more companies that maybe I like the company, but I don't love the position, or I love the position, but I don't love the company as much, things like that. So I do think that you can start with being picky and kind of give yourself a timeline. I know that I kind of gave myself, like, I was graduating in May, and I said, if by like mid-March I didn't hear back or didn't have a solid lead, I would go to that more broad looking of being a little less picky, and and then go from there. So I get it. It's not going to be the easiest, smoothest system, but I do still think that you should try to stay as true to yourself and as true to what you want as possible, until you really feel like you need to just get a job at that point. So that's a personal preference, totally up to you, but I understand it.
Awesome. Thank you, Kara. All right. The next question is from Ian. I think Durward can answer this one. How likely is it that specific question, I'm guessing the anagrams question, would pop up in my upcoming interview?
I would say it's a pretty simple question. You might get asked that. It's a fairly common one, and it's relatively known across many places in terms of if you're talking just generally or Viva specifically. But I think it would certainly be paired with a more maybe technical question, but just for the sake of this, I wanted to kind of go with a more broadly known question that we all have maybe been exposed to, or just kind of easier to follow along on a slide, because doing a whole complicated question with like a depth first search solution might be kind of tricky to follow along. So this was really just an option, and you might see it, you might not. Really up to the person who's interviewing you.
Awesome. Thank you. And let's see, how important would you say an optimized solution is? If you have a working solution and an idea of how to optimize it, how would that generally come across?
So if I'm understanding this, you already have the working solution, and then you have an idea and you're considering implementing that. I think that's good. I think that's fine. For a new grad, especially, if you can get to that optimized spot, I'm not too concerned about how you got there. If you can end at that optimized goal, that's great. If you're able to think of that idea for optimization right off the bat and you know it, I would certainly say you can go for that solution first. And if you were able to do that right away, that certainly is more impressive, but don't feel, again, stuck on trying to get that optimized solution if that's not coming to you right away. It is better to get something working because yeah, it's just not, you really want working code at the end of the day. So it's kind of a bit nuanced there, but I hope that helps a bit. I don't know if Kara has any other suggestions there, or if that seems right.
I mean, it builds off what Durwood said in his part of the presentation, but basically, if you have a working solution, an idea of how to optimize it, if you know how, but you don't know the specific implementation, that's the kind of thing that an interviewer most likely will jump in and be like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Like we could do this, this, or this. So how would that generally come across? Great. It would generally come across as good. You know, you got the working solution and you know the next steps to optimize.
All right, thank you. Okay, this is related, so I'll skip down to the question from Abriel. Do coding questions in an interview usually have a time limit?
So the interviews have a time limit, and it kind of depends on the company too. Sometimes you're given at-home coding tests, and they do have time limits. I know that usually the technical interviews I've been a part of have been anywhere from like 45 minutes to an hour. So there's usually a built-in idea of how long it would take you to solve a problem. You can sometimes go over that if you need to, but and then of course there's just a hard stop of the end of the interview. So yeah.
All right, and one more question from Abriel. What skills would you say are the best to have as a software engineer?
To be versatile, be able to learn those new languages that you don't know. I don't know exactly what types of skills you're looking for here, but yeah, definitely, you know, those design skills and having the ability to create, to think of similarly to a coding question. It's not always going to be as straightforward as that in the real world and real work, but it is always the same process of, you know, designing your solution and being able to implement that from there. So just being able to be versatile and really dig into that and be willing to learn those new technologies and new designs and yeah, I don't have specific skills because obviously it's different for every company, specific to like languages and technologies. But as for kind of sort of more behavioral, but on the tech side of behavioral, that's the important part. And I think that's a lot of what you learn in college is you learn a lot of the language specific, but you also just learn a lot of how to actually code, and that comes into play when you're learning new languages and starting at a new job.
And I'll extend on that a little bit. Kind of as you mentioned, whatever you're looking at for the company you're applying to, if they have listings, having some of those languages or whatever is helpful. But that being said, like if you want to do like Android development, but you've never done it through coursework or previous internship, that's not like the end of the world. That's a great opportunity for you to kind of in your free time, just make a simple little like calculator app or something and throw that on GitHub, because that shows that you're really excited to learn. It shows a good example of a personal project on GitHub, which people like to see. And so you can get some of those technical skills just on yourself with just some like pretty simple, you don't have to do anything crazy complicated, but just some simple examples, and companies tend to be really impressed if you show that initiative.
Great. All right. A question from Ian. Do you think the boundaries you mentioned, I'm assuming their words section on work-life balance, setting those types of boundaries, is that easier to establish because Viva is a public benefit corporation? How does that make Viva different from a normal corporation?
I would say I think that is a definitely good signal from Viva being a public benefit corporation, and some of that also has to do with kind of our role in society and the way we treat customers as well as our employees and everything. But it's not something exclusive to public benefit corporations. When I started, Viva wasn't even a public benefit corporation yet. So this is kind of goes back to Kara's slides of you should figure out what's important for you. And this is something that you could definitely figure out what that work culture is like in your interviews. When you are talking to the tech team, you can ask them like, hey, like, how often are you working? Like, what is it like? What's kind of the culture here? Is it really kind of like hardcore and people are just heads down and not talking? Or is it more like collaborative and kind of that kind of thing? So it goes back to that. Utilize your interview, because there are definitely other companies that I've both interned at and have heard of that don't have that reputation, and that's pretty easy. And also stuff like Glassdoor is great for finding out different things like that. And I would also just caution that, and this same with Glassdoor interviews, it can differ even within a company from team to team, what's expected or how your life will be. So that kind of reinforces the whole bring this up during your interview with your team or your potential team, because that's really your true source of knowing what that will kind of be like.
Perfect. And one last question, unless any others pop up in the next couple minutes. Am I allowed to use Google for a Viva LeetCode question?
This is a great question. I don't know for everything, but in terms of if you want to do that, that is something you should ask. And I've done that in my own technical interviews that I've been a part of. I'll just ask right up front. It's like, hey, am I allowed to do any Googling, or is it just all within the window? Sometimes they'll respond like, just ask me what you want to know, and I might give you that or tell you you're expected to know things. Or sometimes I'll be like, yeah, sure. Personally, for me, I usually let people search, or at least ask me what they plan on searching, and I can help them with it. Because there are certain things like, what's the put method for certain data types with everything? It can be kind of tricky to have those memorized all the time. So I would not assume that you could Google by any means, because there will be people who won't let you, but it's a good question to ask. And I don't think anybody would give you a hard time for asking if you could do it.
Yeah, I've tended to see in a couple of different scenarios where, if someone's asking you a question in your preferred language, but they don't exactly know all the syntactical things of your language, they'll be like, all right, let's just look it up, and they'll allow that. Because a lot of these different, if it's just like an IDE or just like a text editor or whatever's being used for the actual coding question, that they're not, auto completing, which is what we see in real life. We're like, okay, we know it's, put, but is it put all? Is it put if, or what, stuff like that? So that's the reality. And so I think a lot of interviewers tend to try to mimic the real world as much as possible. But definitely ask. That is a big no-no if you just start Googling things without the interviewing or allowing you to.
All right. Those are all the questions we have. So yes, we can wrap it up. Unless there's any last questions, feel free to type them in the chat.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to us, either Jared or I on LinkedIn. And if you have any other questions, and go to our page on Way Up, which is in the chat.